management of vascular surgery patients. Preoperative assessment and management of vascular patients are important because these patients have multi-system involvement. They are at high risk for complication after surgery, and complication can be minimized and optimal choices can be made for the timing of elective surgery. Serum electrolyte concentration should be evaluated and corrected if abnormality exists. A baseline creatinine should be measured as some vascular interventions may compromise renal function. Serum glucose concentration should be measured and coagulation profile should be identified to identify any coagulation abnormalities before surgery. And chest radiography should be taken to look for any abnormality present. Coming to the system-wise evaluation of the patient, we will start with the cardiac evaluation. Cardiac history, physical examination, baseline ECG should be taken. Advanced cardiac tests for selected patients. The recommendation provided by the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association are as follows. Further cardiac testing is not generally recommended in patients who have adequate functional capacity with more than 4 metabolic equivalents. Patients who have undergone coronary revascularization within 5 years and have normal finding on coronary angiography or cardiac stress testing within 2 years, and there is no significant functional changes within these 2 years. Diapardemol thallium imaging or diapardemol stress echocardiography is indicated for patients at intermediate to high risk, poor or unknown functional capacity with less than 4 metabolic equivalents, unstable angina or an active arrhythmia. Coronary angiography is recommended if there are signs of active ischemia and the patient is symptomatic. The functional status of the patient is a good predictor of both the cardiac and overall risk of the patient for surgery and hospitalization. Patients with cardiac implantable electronic devices may require reprogramming before the surgery to prevent the transient inhibition of pacing or the inappropriate triggering of the shocks. External defibrillator equipment should be available in the operating room. Pre-operative medical versus interventional therapy for cardiac disease patients. Perioperative use of beta blockers is standard of care for most patients with cardiac disease undergoing vascular surgery. According to the perioperative ischemic evaluation trial, there is reduction in primary cardiac events with perioperative beta blockers. However, this benefit is offset by an increased risk of stroke and total mortality post-surgery. Recommendation for beta blockers use is in patients who have been on them chronically with intermediate or high-risk myocardial ischemia and have 3 or more revised cardiac risk index like diabetes mellitus, heart failure, coronary artery disease, renal insufficiency, and cerebrovascular accident. The beta blocker should be titrated to adjust for bradycardia and hypotension. Most other home medicines, including aspirin, statins, and antihypertensives, should be continued. Statins should be initiated prior to surgery. Statins reduce the risk of adverse cardiovascular events through effects on endothelial function, reduction in the vascular inflammation, and stabilization of the erythematous plaque. Current ACC/AHA guidelines support the use of dual antiplatelet therapy following percutaneous coronary intervention. If the risk of surgical bleeding is high, elective vascular procedures should be postponed until dual therapy can be safely withheld. Elective non-cardiac surgery should be delayed 30 days after bare metal stent implantation and optimally 6 months after drug-eluting stent implantations. If non-cardiac surgery is anticipated to be performed soon after stent placement, the bare metal stent is preferred over drug-eluting stents. Patient on dual antiplatelet therapy and surgical procedure that mandate the discontinuation of adenosine diphosphate receptor inhibitor therapy, it is recommended that aspirin be continued if possible and adenosine diphosphate receptor inhibitor be restored as soon as possible after the surgery. According to coronary artery revascularization prophylaxis trial, coronary artery revascularization before elective major vascular surgery in stable coronary artery disease patients, it does not improve long-term cardiac outcomes, or it does not reduce any short-term post-operative outcomes. So preoperative coronary artery disease revascularization in vascular patients, it increases risk for procedure-related complications and leads to delay in the intended vascular procedures. A recent CABG or percutaneous intervention within 5 years before vascular surgery, there is no survival advantage over patients at high cardiac risk without previous coronary interventions. Only a subset of patients with unprotected left main disease shows a benefit from preoperative coronary artery revascularization, and CABG has an improved outcome over percutaneous intervention. Preoperative management of hypertension. Elective surgery should generally be delayed if systolic blood pressure is greater than 200 mmHg or diastolic blood pressure is greater than 120 mmHg. Pain can elevate blood pressure. Appropriate analgesia with non-steroidal anti-arrhythmic drugs or opiates should be administered to alleviate the pain. Home antihypertensive medication should be continued. The incidence of intraoperative hypotension appears to be increased in patients receiving ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers on the day of surgery. It has been seen there is increase in risk of all-cause death, stroke, and MI in these patients. Coming to the pulmonary evaluation, history, physical examination, and preoperative pulmonary evaluation should be done. Pulmonary complications are reported in 1 to 2% of minor surgeries and up to 20% in upper abdominal and thoracic surgeries. Patient-related risk factors for post-operative pulmonary complications include chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, age greater than 60, ASA class 2, functionally dependent patients, smoking history, forced expiratory volume less than 1 liter, congestive heart failure, and obesity. Generally, patients with BMI more than 40 kg per meter square, they have a 30% chance of developing atelectasis or pneumonia after surgery. All major surgeries have a risk of pulmonary complications. History of smoking, exercise intolerance, unexplained dyspnea, or coughing should be known prior to surgery. On physical examination, decreased breath sound, wheeze, crackles, or a prolonged expiratory phase should be noted. American College of Physicians recommends preoperative pulmonary functional tests only in patients who have undiagnosed chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Low serum albumin less than 35 gram per liter is an independent marker of increased risk for post-operative pulmonary complications. Risk reduction surgery should be used in patients identified as at risk for pulmonary complication, which includes smoking, sedation, respiratory physiotherapy, respiratory muscle training, optimization of the nutritional status, and post-operative lung expansion techniques when appropriate. Active smokers have a twofold increased risk for post-operative complications. Patients who have quit smoking for more than 6 months have a risk similar to those who do not smoke. Smoking cessation improves ciliary function and decrease in sputum production. Strategies to improve the quit rate for smoking: counseling, nicotine replacement therapy, bupropion, and Vaseline. Nicotine replacement therapy is available in several formulations like in the transdermal patch, gum, nasal spray, inhaler, and lozenge. Bupropion is an atypical antidepressant and Vaseline is a partial agonist of alpha-4 beta-2 nicotinic receptor. Second-line agents are nortriptyline, a tricyclic antidepressant, and clonidine, an antihypertensive drug. However, Vaseline has been shown to offer significant improvement in abstinence rates over antidepressants. Optimization before surgery in patients with a history of bronchospasm and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease can be done by inhaled bronchodilators, beta-2 agonists, and anticholinergics. It should begin at least 5 days before the surgery. Systemic corticosteroids are recommended when forced expiratory volume is less than 80% of the predicted value. Lung expansion techniques used to limit post-operative pulmonary complications are intensive spirometry, chest physical therapy, cough, postural drainage, ambulation, and continuous positive airway pressure. Coming to the renal evaluation, one third of all the vascular surgery patients suffer from stage 3 or higher chronic kidney disease. Because there is a shared risk factor of diabetes, hypertension, atherosclerosis, obesity, alcohol, nicotine abuse, and hypercholesterolemia in these patients. Kidney functions must be carefully evaluated preoperatively. The preoperatively evaluation should include an assessment of the patient of the failure of symptoms such as fatigue, dry skin, muscle cramps, decreased urine output, recurrent urinary tract infection, edema, history of renal disease, and history of dialysis or transplantation. The examination should focus on signs of hyperkalemia, volume status, anemia, and bleeding. In all patients, preoperatively complete blood count should be done to evaluate for anemia and thrombocytopenia, which is common in CKD patients. Electrolyte acid-based abnormalities should be looked for. Baseline renal function should be measured. Chest radiograph should be taken to look for the signs of any fluid overload. Examination of the vascular access site should be done. Dialysis catheter should be inspected for signs of infection and its functionality. AV fistula or graft, if present, should be assessed for functionality or any infection present. Hyperkalemia, if present, should be corrected before surgical intervention. Treatment options include for hyperkalemia include polystyrene binding resins, insulin in combination with intravenous dextrose, calcium carbonate for cardiac stabilization, intravenous bicarbonate, and dialysis. Patient maintained with dialysis should undergo dialysis the day before the surgery. Prolonged bleeding and frequent bruising can suggest a coagulation abnormality in the patient. Thrombocytopenia may result in an increased incidence of perioperative bleeding, and it should be corrected before the surgery. Anemia is usually present in patients with end-stage renal artery disease. Red blood cells can be transfused to correct the hematocrit before surgery. Unnecessary transfusion should be avoided. Elective surgery should be delayed until erythropoietin can be administered and the hematocrit allowed to increase in response to the patient's own production of the RBCs. Coming to the contrast-induced nephropathy is the third most common cause of hospital-acquired acute renal injury. There is a significant problem as more patients are receiving iodinated contrast media for computer or CT scanning, angiography, and endovascular procedures. Sodium bicarbonate and N-acetylcysteine can be used to prevent contrast-induced nephropathy. However, there are insufficient data to recommend. Strategies to reduce the risk of contrast-induced nephropathy include avoiding of iodinated contrast completely by using alternative imaging techniques like MRI, ultrasound, or CO2 as a contrast. It should be limit of the volume of iodinated contrast and use of non-ionic low osmolar agents should be done. Judicious peri-procedural hydration with isotonic saline should be done. Coming to the diabetes, the prevalence of undiagnosed diabetes in surgical patients is high. Complete diabetic history should be known. High glucose levels are associated with increased morbidity and mortality. It should be controlled before, during, and after vascular surgery. Glucose control should be attained weeks before elective surgery. HbA1c is used to assess long-term glucose control. Preoperative HbA1c within 180 days of the surgery of less than 7 is significantly associated with a decrease in infectious complications. The American Diabetes Association and Canadian Diabetes Association recommend on inpatient glycemic control. In the ICU, the glucose goal should be maintained between 140 and 180 milligram per deciliter. For general medical and surgical patients, the pre-meal glucose should be less than 140 milligram per deciliter, and random blood glucose should be less than 180 milligram per deciliter. Patients with type 2 diabetes treated by diet alone, they should abstain from oral intake overnight before the surgery, and hydration may be maintained with intravenous solutions. Hyperglycemia is treated with supplemental short-acting insulins. Oral agents are generally withheld the day of surgery and hyperglycemia corrected with the insulin. Specific sliding scale insulin regimes are typically standardized on the basis of hospital practices. Coming to the adrenal evaluation, patients who have been chronically treated with steroids are at risk for perioperative adrenal crisis. Hypothalamic or pituitary dysfunction should be considered in patients who have brain tumor, previous brain irradiation, or sarcoidosis. Primary adrenal efficiency may be present in patients with tuberculosis with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome and autoimmune endocrine syndrome. Intraoperative steroid coverage is not required in patients who are taking less than 5 milligrams of prednisolone or its equivalent, or who have been treated for less than 3 weeks, or are taking less than 10 milligrams of prednisolone or its equivalent on alternate days. They should continue to receive their regular daily dose of steroid. Patients taking greater than 20 mg per day of prednisolone should receive supplemental operative steroids. In minor surgery, they should receive 25 mg of hydrocortisone at the start of the procedure. Their usual replacement dose after the procedure should be continued. In moderately complex surgery like lower limb revascularization, they should receive 50 to 75 mg of hydrocortisone on the day of surgery, and it should be tapered to the patient's usual replacement dose over 1 to 2 days. For major surgeries like thoracic or abdominal surgeries, they should receive 100 to 150 mg of hydrocortisone on the day of surgery, and which should be tapered to their usual dose over the next 2 to 3 days. Deep vein thrombosis prophylaxis. The potential for deep vein thrombosis in surgical patients can be stratified by risk factors and the type of operation which is being done. Patient's coagulation status, previous history of thrombotic events, current and previous exposure to antiplatelet and anticoagulation therapy should be known. Possibility of procoagulant states should be known, like antithrombin 3 deficiency, protein C and S deficiency, antiphospholipid syndrome, disseminated intravascular coagulation. The prophylaxis for DVT prophylaxis are categorized into two. One is pharmacological prophylaxis and the other is mechanical prophylaxis. In pharmacological prophylaxis, we use unfractionated heparin, low molecular heparin, fondaparinol, warfarin, directly thrombodin, or factor XA inhibitors. In mechanical devices, we have compression stockings, intermittent pneumatic compression, and venous foot pumps. Recommendations specific to vascular surgery are limited because of the lack of large randomized trials. Recommendation for vascular surgery are pooled with recommendation for patients undergoing general, urological, gynecological, bariatric, and plastic surgery. This is the table showing the recommendation for thromboprophylaxis in various risk groups. The various risk groups are categorized in very low, moderate, high risk, and high risk with contraindication to heparin. And besides, also they are categorized into two groups: one with the average risk of bleeding, and the other with the high risk of bleeding. In very low, no specific prophylaxis is required. In low group, mechanical prophylaxis with intermittent pneumatic compression. In moderate, high, and high-risk cancer surgery, low-dose unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin or mechanical prophylaxis, preferably intermittent pneumatic compression, should be used. In high-risk, low-dose with the contraindication to heparin, fondaparinol or low-dose aspirin with mechanical prophylaxis should be used. In high risk group where the chance of bleeding are more, the mechanical prophylaxis should be started before, followed by this pharmacological prophylaxis when the bleeding chances are less. Current recommendation for the American College of Chest Physicians in patients with a history of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. Non-heparin anticoagulants such as bivalirudin, lepiridine, and ergotraban should be given over heparin. In patients with a history of heparin-induced thrombocythemia but without heparin antibodies, heparin anticoagulant may be used. Bridging anticoagulation with therapeutic dose of low molecular weight heparin is recommended for perioperative management of anticoagulation in high-risk patients, which include patients with mitral valve prosthesis, any caged or tilting disc aortic prosthesis, recent within 6 months stroke or TIA, patients with a recent within 3 months history of venous thromboembolism, patients with atrial fibrillation with a recent in 3 months stroke or TIA, or have a history of rheumatic valvular heart disease. Current recommendation for bridging is patients should be assessed at least 7 days prior to surgery. Warfarin should be discontinued 5 days prior to surgery. INR testing should be done on the day of surgery. Low molecular weight heparin should be started 3 days prior to surgery and stopped the day of surgery. Bridging is resumed 12 to 24 hours after the surgery, depending on the risk of the bleeding. Coming to the infections, patients with infections in the preoperative period have increased risk for surgical site infections. Common source of infection is urinary tract infection, pulmonary system, ischemic extremity, or any prosthetic material. History and examination should be performed to elicit signs and symptoms of infection like recent fever, cough, sputum production, urinary symptoms, tenderness or rhythm of the graft site, or purulence from an open wound or ischemic extremity. If infection is identified, elective surgery should be delayed until optimization. Choice of antibiotics should be tailored to sensitivities identified. In the absence of infection, perioperative prophylactic antibiotic administration is recommended. Antibiotics should be administered within 1 hour before incision and should be discontinued within 24 hours post-operatively unless required. Preoperative anemia. Low hematocrit levels increase the post-operative risk for death and cardiac events in elderly patients. Anemic patients should be evaluated to determine whether transfusion is likely to be of benefit. Patients' cardiac status may influence the decision to transfuse. Current guidelines recommend adhering to a restrictive transfusion strategy when possible. In adults and pediatric intensive care unit patients, transfusion should be considered at hemoglobin level of 7 or less. In post-operative surgical patients, transfusion should be considered at a hemoglobin of 8 gram per deciliter or less, or if symptoms including chest pain, orthostatic hypotension, and tachycardia unresponsive to fluid resuscitation is present. Transfusion should also be considered in symptomatic anemia, actively bleeding, if anticipated blood loss from surgery will result in hemoglobin levels falling below the transfusion threshold. For elective surgery, autologous transfusion or administration of erythropoietin should be considered to boost the patient's red blood cell volume. Coming to the nutrition, preoperative malnutrition contributes to an increased risk of post-operative complications like impaired wound healing and infection, pulmonary complications, longer hospital stay, higher health costs, and overall increased morbidity and mortality. Lower preoperatively nutritional indices are associated with more severe systemic inflammatory response syndrome after major vascular surgery. Serum albumin is a standard laboratory assessment for nutritional status. Hypoalbuminemia less than 3.5 gram per day is an independent predictor of major adverse events and death after major open vascular surgery. Similar relationship is not observed for endovascular procedures. Nutrition assessment should be performed for all vascular surgical patients. History evaluating changes in weight, appetite, and functional should be known. Symptoms of nausea, vomiting, dysphagia, constipation, diarrhea, and related gastrointestinal complaints should be assessed. Weight loss of more than 5% in 1 month or 10% in 6 months can signify an increased risk for post-operative complications. Physical examination should focus on body habitus, edema, pallor, decubus, ulcers, fatigue, ecchymosis, poor skin turgor, fissure, tongue, inflamed gum, ulceration of the oral mucosa, brittle hair, and nail abnormalities. Serum albumin is the most appropriate laboratory test to assess nutrition status. Albumin is the most abundant plasma protein and has a long half-life, 18 to 21 days. It's a marker of the chronic protein status and a better evaluation of nutritional status than anthropometric measures. Serum pre-albumin and transferrin levels have a shorter half-life and are more sensitive to the short-term response to nutritional support. Preoperatively, nutrition support can lower post-operative complication rate, particularly in those with severe malnutrition with albumin less than 2.1 gram per deciliter. It is recommended that nutrition support be provided for 10 to 14 days before elective major surgery. Immune enhancing nutrition supplementation can significantly reduce post-operative complications. Immune enhancing formulas intend to bolster function of the immune system, include arginine, glutamine, and omega-3 polysaturated long-chain fatty acids. To ethical and legal concerns, both the physician and patients must consider it as part of the decision to proceed with surgery. The preoperative setting is ideal for both the patient and the physician to come to a mutual understanding about the expectations of the physician-patient relationship. The treatment decided on to minimize the chance that legal action will be initiated. Patient confidentiality is important to address the privacy and the release of health information. Physicians have a duty to maintain confidentiality with their patients. They may not disclose any medical information discovered in connection with the treatment of a patient. Information contained in a patient's medical record may be released to third parties only if the patient provides consent. Breach in confidentiality can lead to mistrust, lawsuit, or disciplinary action. Exception can be made if patients threaten bodily harm to themselves or to others. Informed consent must be obtained from all patients before surgical intervention. To provide consent, the patient must have an understanding of the diagnosis, the purpose of the proposed procedure, the risks and benefits associated with the procedure, the alternative treatments, and the risk and benefits of not undergoing the procedure. If the patient does not have decision-making capacity, a family member or someone with power of attorney will need to be designated to make decision on behalf of the patient. Patients should make themselves familiar with the state laws regarding confidentiality, reporting of abuse, and informed consent. Thank you.